This video will introduce the concept of outcomes-based education. I think a lot of faculty think of curriculum as something else, something intangible. But curriculum is really just the plan that we have for our students' learning experiences. And so it encompasses everything from degrees and programs to courses and assignments. And curriculum design is actually really coalescing right now around an outcomes-based approach to education. Sometimes referred to as backwards design or constructive alignment, this approach starts with the end in mind. Outcomes-based education asks instructors to think carefully about what they want their students to be able to do by the end of the learning experience, and then design assessments that effectively allow them to determine if their students have been successful. Learning outcomes should be specific, observable, measurable behaviors. If you want your students to develop critical thinking skills, what would it look like if a student were thinking critically in your course or area? Assessments should reflect those learning outcomes. Now that you've identified what it is that you want your students to be able to do, you should be able to identify how you would assess whether they could actually do it. Designing teaching and learning activities around those skills gives students the opportunity to practice, get feedback, and adjust before summative assessments. Now, ideally, curriculum design would happen in this order. Start thinking about the content, course materials, lectures, resources, activities, after you have a clear idea of what the assessments are. Then teaching and learning activities should really be organized around getting students to a place where they can effectively complete assessments and demonstrate to you their competence on a set of learning outcomes. The underlying theme of outcomes-based education is alignment. Program learning outcomes should be reflected in the course learning outcomes. Not all courses will address all program learning outcomes, but the outcomes that they do address should align with program level learning outcomes. And assessment objectives should align with course learning outcomes. The evaluation rubric, in turn, should reflect the assignment objectives. So really the theme here is alignment. All the way, you can follow that line all the way up from the program level design down to how assessments are being evaluated. We also want to make a note about terminology. Learning objectives, core competencies, learning outcomes. Are there differences between these terms? It really depends on the context. Theoretically, there are differences between some of these terms, but people often use them interchangeably, and we don't want to get bogged down into a pedantic argument. So for our purposes, the difference between course objectives, competencies, program outcomes, goals, etc. are just words. All of them will be referring to the idea of intended goals of a learning in various contexts and sizes. Although I tend to use learning outcomes, that tends to be my default. It's the end of this module. You should be able to define curriculum, describe the outcomes-based approach to education, and explain the concept of alignment in curriculum design.